Blackest Night is a film about a teenage girl named Shauna who builds her self-esteem battling vampires over one summer in New Orleans as the vampires prey on the disenfranchised people of New Orleans. The film is part of the series quartet of Welcome to Blumhouse Films and is currently streaming on Amazon Prime. For this conversation, I was able to speak with the film's writer, Sherman Payne, about his film. So let's get right into that conversation.
Hi, Sherman. How's it going?
It's going great, Daniel. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
No, thank you. I'm appreciative of the opportunity. I'd love if you could talk about how you were approached to write the script for this.
So I wasn't approached by anybody. This was actually an original script that I came up with on my own.
Okay.
And then it eventually found its way to executive producer Maggie Molina, who's a good friend and former boss of mine at MTV. And she was able to sort of shepherd the script to Blumhouse and Amazon ultimately. So it was an original idea, and Maggie sort of carried it over the finish line for us. I came up with this idea basically as a reaction to vampire media in general. I mean, I sort of, like I'm probably sure you did, grew up in the era of Twilight and True Blood and the Vampire Diaries, and I love all those pieces. But I think that they have a very specific kind of protagonist, which is
Okay.
a young white woman who's a little passive and a little bit of the damsel in distress. And I really wanted to do something that honored the Black women in my life and give a main character in a vampire movie a little more agency and a little more of an aggressive stance. Not aggressive.
Okay.
I don't want to say aggressive. I want to say more of a. That's not the right word. More of a take charge stance.
Okay. Okay. And one aspect I really enjoyed about your film is just the whole aspect of the discrimination. I mean, I don't know if it would be discrimination, but just like the dark skin and how she's not beautiful because she's too dark. So can you talk about that aspect of your film?
Well, I think that especially from us Black people, members of the Black community, we know about colorism, right? We know that colorism has always existed within our community. There used to be something called the paper bag test, where you hold your hand up to a brown lunch sack, and if you were lighter than that, you were considered more honorable and pretty, and if you were darker than that, you were a little bit of an outcast. And I think
Mm.
we've always experienced colorism. So while I hope that I'm exposing some new communities to this idea, but I think most Black people will tell you this is something that has existed throughout history and it still exists today, unfortunately, the idea of colorism. So I think that's really whack. And, I also wanted to write something where so often as a filmmaker and as a writer and a producer on television, which I am as well, when we cast Black roles, everybody who comes in for the Black roles are light-skinned Black people, especially for female characters. And I wanted to write something where we, no pun intended, painted ourselves into a corner and really had to cast a young, dark-skinned Black woman, because I think those women are beautiful. And I think that, I hope that young women with dark complexions can find something heroic in the character of Shauna.
Okay. And I thought it was a really, really eloquent part of the film. So I appreciate you. If no one has ever heard of it, I think I've been somewhat familiar with it, but I think it really came across pretty well in your film.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd also love to ask, what was it like incorporating like the history of New Orleans into the film?
I think that's a great aspect of the film. It's something one of the aspects I'm most proud of. For me, it was a no-brainer. When we knew that we were going to shoot in New Orleans, New Orleans is not a place that I think can exist quietly in the background as a location. I think if you're shooting in New Orleans, it has such a specific, loud, vibrant culture. You have to incorporate it within the story. And then, as an observer of news and culture and politics, I, I was devastated at Hurricane Katrina and followed the aftermath very, very closely, and watched how that affected the fabric of the city, how that affected politics, how that affected housing, and all of those different things. So I knew from the jump that I wanted to sort of honor those stories and those moments in the movie somehow.
Okay. Yeah, and just one thing that really like struck me about it is just the fact that like in horror films set in New Orleans, it's mostly about the history of horror in the city, but not so much about Hurricane Katrina in itself. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I'm old enough to remember Hurricane Katrina when it happened. Like I remember
Okay.
where I was when the levees broke and watching the news over the next couple of days in the aftermath of that, horrible disaster. But I also wanted to, I'm doing this movie is about teenagers and young teenagers who would not have remembered that. So I wanted to really it was inherent in sort of the setup and the age of the characters that we discuss the aftermath, that we look at the long-term ripple effects of the disaster of Hurricane Katrina and not just the impact of the actual storm, but what has happened in the decades since. And I was really proud that we were able to incorporate that because it's ongoing.
Hmm.
New Orleans and really sort of all Black culture in the South will forever be affected by what happened in 2005.
Can you talk about like reflecting on that scene between Shauna and her father just checking out their old house and just watching that scene again, knowing that there's been another hurricane to come through New Orleans?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think that I thought about that as we were sort of getting ready to do press and put this movie out. Is that it is on one hand a historical commentary, but on the other hand, it's also a commentary about the present and sort of the ongoing issues that are always going to affect disenfranchised people when natural disasters hit. I mean, before the hurricane that most recently hit Katrina, we could have been talking about that hurricane in Puerto Rico a couple of years ago, right? Like this is
Sure.
not an issue that's going to go away because of the uneven application of uh, disaster relief and how it so often falls upon racial and economic lines. So I think that I'm so in a way as a screenwriter, you always want your work to be timeless. You always want it to be feel urgent and timely for the exact moment you're in. But it's sort of sad that that scene and that conversation will always be relevant until we make some major systemic changes in this country.
Okay. And before we get into the vampires, I'd love just to ask, can you talk about setting the Umbro as a symbolism of just that last bit of New Orleans before Katrina?
Well, one of the things that I think a lot of the country may have turned away after Katrina and the waters receded and things started to rebuild and tourism started to come back. But for a lot of us who are interested in the bigger picture, we were watching how Katrina was being used as a backdoor way to remake the city, and to
Okay.
change the fabric of that city, which has historically been a big, diverse city, which with a vibrant Black culture. And one of the things that you can really research and see even today, if you Google it, you'll see that public housing has largely gone away. And public housing, as we understand it in New Orleans, has been, cut within a fraction of its life. So I just wanted to, in a movie, sometimes you need to have that one big symbol to represent more. And that's what the Umbro was all about for us. I think there probably is some public housing still left, and there are some projects still left in New Orleans, but we were using the Umbro as symbolism for the housing crisis that occurred in the wake of Hurricane Katrina.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for being very like insightful with all that. Thank you. Um, I'd also love to ask, just what was it like for you kind of changing the roles of the vampire genre in a way?
And to be more specific, what are you referring to?
Oh, just that they can actually go through the sun. They don't have to ask for an invite in.
Yeah, well, you know what? So two things. One is the walking in the sun thing. To me, was very much tied to what we were talking about earlier with colorism.
Oh,
And
sure.
this idea that uh, you know um, that we can sort of love our skin tone, love what our melanin brings to our own beauty and our own culture, and really refining it to make it make sense within a vampire mythology. I thought was like a nice way to sort of twist it. um in terms of the joke with having the vampires having to be invited into the house, we just really wanted to, because we made a movie where vampire lore exists, we were really searching for ways that we could undercut the existing lore. And I thought it would be really funny if Grania was wrong. This vampire expert who thinks that she knows so much based on vampire fiction actually gets it wrong when it really counts, I thought would be a really humorous and sort of way to represent the way that we are sort of subverting the vampire genre altogether throughout the whole movie. Really
Okay.
crystallized.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was talking with her and she was saying that was one of her favorite scenes, that moment.
Yeah,
And she's just wrong.
I love it. Yeah, it's pretty funny, and I love the way that we handled it after the big battle, and that somebody calls her out on
Okay.
it.
Now,
Yeah,
what's it like having Keith David for your film?
I mean, it's well, how can you articulate that? It's like a dream come true. I mean, that's the guy. We have, if you love movies, whether you're black, white, or otherwise, Keith David, and you love that voice, and you love the gravitas that he brings to anything he does. And what a, I don't want to spoil too much. I couldn't think of a better role for him in this movie. So it's a dream come true, and I thought that he killed it as expected. He did a great job.
Okay, cool. Now, yeah, just with your point that like he has such a distinct voice, like I love that you don't show him on screen until like 50 minutes in, but you still know that's Keith David.
That was a real strong choice that Marty Go, our director, made, and I think that it was the right choice to make, and it came out great.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it wasn't written like that. It was sort of
No.
something that no, it wasn't. It wasn't. It was something that her and Keith concocted together because they were both very aware that putting him on screen in a more direct way. It's sort of like when you watch like a episode of Law and Order and you see a named actor in the first 5 minutes, you're like, okay, they're going to be important to the mystery later on, even though we're trying to play them off. So I think they wanted to hide that a little bit. And I think that the way they did it was so clever because if you know, but otherwise it's also like a nice moment later in the movie.
Yeah, just like, that guy.
Yeah,
But,
exactly.
sorry if I'd already asked it, but did you have a favorite scene to write?
Oh, that's a really great question. Um, Man, I like a lot of the scenes. I'll tell you a couple of my favorite scenes as they exist in the movie.
Okay.
I love the way that Sibel Martin, our DP, and Marty Go shot the. I won't spoil it, but there's a scene, with the mom. There's a big sort of action-oriented scene with some cool special effects, and I just love the way that Marty and Sibel Martin shot that scene. I think it's well done. And then the scene you mentioned with the father talking to Shauna in the ruins of their old house, that to me is just such an emotionally resonant scene, and I think it really sets the stakes emotionally for Shauna for the rest of the movie. Originally, that scene took place in their house, and we all got the bright idea collectively as a group to set it in the remnants of their old house that was destroyed, and it brought so much more weight to the scene. I really, really love that scene. Really love that scene.
Okay, yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that was my time. So Sherman Payne, writer of Black as Night, I'd like to thank you for coming on the Film Craziest show to chat about your film.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.